In the unforgiving heart of the American West, a woman with eyes the color of the Irish Sea became a ghost before she was even a memory. They called her a stranger, a whisper in the dust-choked town of Redemption Gulch. But out on the vast, silent plains, a Lakota warrior saw something else. He saw a spirit that matched the untamed land, a soul that echoed his own. He laid claim to her heart with a single look, a silent promise made across a chasm of culture and hatred. This is not just a story of love. It is the story of a woman who lost everything to find herself, and the warrior who would burn the world to the ground to keep her safe. The stagecoach bucked and swayed like a condemned man on the gallows, and Leora Byrne felt every lurch in her bones. For 6 days she had been encased in this wooden coffin, on wheels, her fine Boston dress now a wrinkled, dust-caked shroud. When she finally stepped out into the main street of Redemption Gulch, the sun hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was a raw, aggressive heat that seemed to leach the very moisture from the air. Redemption Gulch was less a town and more a wound on the landscape. A single wide street, ankle-deep in pale dust, was flanked by a motley collection of false-fronted buildings, a saloon leaking the tinny sound of a piano, a general store, a blacksmith's forge ringing with a furious rhythm, and the sheriff's office, its windows dark and watchful. Men with sun-cracked faces and guns holstered low on their hips stopped and stared, their eyes hard and assessing, stripped away her dignity layer by layer. She was an anomaly, a splash of fragile color in a world of brown and gray. Leora clutched the handle of her worn leather satchel, the contents within, pressed flowers, sketchbooks and pencils, feeling like foolish, childish things in this brutal place. She had come west not for a husband or for gold, but for the flora. She was a botanist, or had been training to be one fascinated by the resilient plants that thrived in the harshest conditions. It was a passion her late father had nurtured in her, a way of seeing the world that focused on the small, tenacious miracles. Now it was all she had left of him. Well now, look what the stage spat out, a voice drawled thick as molasses. She turned to see a man leaning against the porch of the saloon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored vest and a clean shirt that seemed absurdly out of place. His face was handsome in a severe way, with a neatly trimmed mustache and pale blue eyes that held a chilling possessiveness. This, she would soon learn, was Silas Thorne. He owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, which meant he effectively owned Redemption Gulch. "A little lost, darling?" he asked, pushing off the post and approaching her. He moved with an unearned confidence that set her teeth on edge. "I'm looking for the boarding house," Leora said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the tremor she felt inside. Thorne smiled a slow predator's curl of the lips. "Martha's place, down the end of the street. But a lady like you shouldn't be troubling herself with such meager accommodations. I have a fine home, plenty of room. The boarding house will be sufficient." "Thank you," she replied, her tone clipped. His eyes narrowed slightly, unused to refusal. "A woman alone out here. It's a dangerous world. You'll need a protector." Before Leora could form another cold rebuttal, a disturbance at the far end of the street drew everyone's attention. A small group of Lakota men had ridden into town to trade. They sat atop their ponies with a stillness that was both regal and unnerving to the townsfolk. They were a stark contrast to the boisterous, fidgeting settlers. Their long, dark hair braided their buckskin clothing, decorated with intricate beadwork, their faces proud and unreadable. The town's simmering hostility thickened. Men moved their hands closer to their holstered pistols. Women pulled their children closer. The air crackled with unspoken violence, and then Leora's eyes met his. He was at the forefront of the Lakota party. He was younger than the others, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22. His face was a masterpiece of sharp angles and smooth bronze skin, his jaw set with a fierce intensity. A single eagle feather was tied in his hair, which fell in 2 thick braids over his powerful chest. But it was his eyes that captured her. They were dark like the earth after a storm, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving, absolute focus. Unlike Silas Thorne's gaze, which sought to possess this man's eyes, seemed to recognize. There was no lust in them, no calculation. It was something deeper, more elemental. It was a look that bypassed the dusty street, the hostile crowd, the chasm of language and race, and struck something dormant and ancient within her soul. In that single silent moment, Leora felt more seen than she had in her entire life. One of the Lakota elders spoke to him in their native tongue, a series of low guttural sounds, but the young warrior did not break his gaze. A low growl rumbled in Silas Thorne's chest beside her. "Filthy savages!" he muttered, his possessive hand landing on Leora's arm. "Don't you look at them!" The touch was a violation, and Leora flinched, pulling her arm away with a sharp tug. "Do not touch me!" she said, her voice low and furious. Thorne was taken aback, his handsome face flushing with anger, but his attention was immediately drawn back to the warrior. The Lakota's eyes had shifted from Leora to Thorne's hand on her arm, and his expression had transformed. The quiet intensity had hardened into a promise of swift and total violence. His hand, which had been resting on his pony's mane, moved almost imperceptibly, his fingers brushing the handle of a knife sheathed at his belt. The world seemed to hold its breath. The dusty street became a stage, and the silent confrontation between the cattle baron and the Lakota warrior was the only play that mattered. Silas Thorne, for all his bluster and power within the town, seemed to recognize a different kind of authority in the warrior's eyes, an authority that came not from land deeds and money, but from the earth itself. After a heart-stopping eternity, the Lakota elder spoke again, his tone more insistent. The warrior finally tore his gaze away from Thorne, gave Leora one last lingering look that felt like a brand on her skin, and then wheeled his pony around, leading his men back out of town the way they came. They disappeared into the shimmering heat haze, leaving only silence and dust in their wake. The tension on the street slowly dissipated, but not for Leora. She stood frozen, the phantom touch of Silas Thorne's hand on her arm, burning, and the intense gaze of the nameless warrior imprinted on her mind. She was a stranger in this land, an outcast before she had even unpacked her bags. But in the eyes of that Lakota warrior, she had felt something else entirely. It was a feeling she couldn't name, a terrifying and exhilarating sense of being claimed before she had even spoken a single word. Martha's boarding house was clean, but smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and regret. Leora's room was small, with a lumpy mattress and a single window that looked out onto a dusty alley. It was a lonely Spartan existence, but it was a sanctuary from the prying eyes of Redemption Gulch. The town treated her with a cold suspicion. She was Thorne's woman in their eyes, despite her public rejection of him, or she was a fool for spurning the town's most powerful man. Either way, she was an outsider. Silas Thorne did not give up easily. He sent her gifts a bolt of silk. She couldn't afford a bottle of French perfume that smelled alien in the sage-scented air. He appeared whenever she stepped out onto the street, his presence a constant, oppressive shadow. Each time she refused him, his smile grew tighter, his eyes colder. Her only escape was the land itself. With her sketchbook and satchel, she would walk out onto the plains, away from the suffocating judgment of the town. Here the world opened up. The sky was a vast, aching blue, and the prairie grasses whispered secrets to the wind. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since her father died. She sketched the fierce beauty of the prickly pear cactus, the delicate resilience of the Indian paintbrush, and the silver-green leaves of the sagebrush. This was her church, her solace. It was during one of these excursions, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, that she found herself in trouble. She had ventured further than usual, following a dry creek bed in search of a rare type of mariposa lily her father had described in his journals. Lost in her work, she hadn't noticed the sky turning a bruised, ominous purple. The wind picked up howling like a mournful spirit, and the temperature dropped. A summer storm was bearing down on the plains with terrifying speed. Disoriented, she tried to retrace her steps, but the landscape that had seemed so open and clear was now a confusing, wind-swept maze. Rain began to fall in thick, cold drops, quickly turning the dry earth to a slick, treacherous mud. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She was lost, soaked, and utterly alone. She slipped in the mud, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. A cry of pain and frustration escaped her lips. As she sat there, rain plastering her hair to her face, a dark shape materialized through the sheeting rain. For a terrifying moment, she thought it was a wolf or a bear. Then the shape resolved into a man on a pony. It was him, the Lakota warrior. He dismounted with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the slippery ground. He wore no expression, but his dark eyes took in her predicament in a single, swift glance, her twisted ankle, her shivering frame, her frightened face. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a spooked deer. He said nothing. Leora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear, and something else she couldn't identify. Everything she had ever heard about savages warred with the memory of his protective gaze in town. He knelt before her, his presence shielding her from the worst of the wind. He pointed to her ankle. Hesitantly she nodded. His hands, surprisingly gentle, probed the tender area with an expert touch. It was a clean sprain, not a break, but it was swelling rapidly. Without a word, he stood and walked to his pony, retrieving a small leather pouch. From it he took a handful of crushed leaves and what looked like a paste of roots. He mixed them with a little rainwater in the palm of his hand, and then, looking at her for permission, gently applied the poultice to her swollen ankle. The effect was almost immediate, a cool, soothing sensation that seemed to draw the fire out of the injury. He then tore a strip of cloth from a roll in his saddlebag and bound her ankle with a practiced efficiency that spoke of long familiarity with injuries. Throughout the entire process, he did not speak. The only sounds were the wind, the rain, and their shared breathing. When he was finished, he looked at her, a question in his eyes. He gestured back in the direction he had come from, then looked at her. It was an offer of shelter. To go with him was an unimaginable risk, a step into a world from which she might never return. But to stay here was to risk pneumonia, or worse. Looking into his calm, steady eyes, she found a sense of safety that Silas Thorne's armed and fortified town had never offered. She gave a small, trembling nod. He helped her to her feet, his arm a band of steel around her waist, and easily lifted her onto his pony, seating her in front of him. His body was a wall of warmth behind her, shielding her from the wind. He smelled of rain leather and something wild and earthy like the prairie itself. As he guided the pony through the storm, his movements sure and certain, Leora rested her head back against his chest, overwhelmed by a dizzying mix of fear, relief, and a profound, inexplicable sense of coming home. He was a stranger whose name she did not know yet. In his silent care, she understood a language more profound than words. He wasn't just showing her the way through the storm. He was showing her the land through his eyes, not as a thing to be conquered, but as a living entity to be respected and understood. The journey was a blur of rain and motion. Leora drifted in and out of a weary daze, lulled by the steady rhythm of the pony's gait and the solid warmth of the man behind her. She had no idea how long they travelled, only that the storm eventually subsided, replaced by a sky washed clean and studded with brilliant, indifferent stars. They stopped by a small hidden spring, sheltered by an overhang of rock. He built a small, smokeless fire with an efficiency that seemed magical, and shared a piece of dried meat with her. It was there in the flickering firelight that they finally spoke. "You are the white woman from the Iron Road town," he said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble, his English careful and accented yet clear. Leora was startled. "You speak English." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I listen. My people trade. We learn the words of those who take our land." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a statement of fact. "My name is Leora." She offered her voice soft. He watched her for a long moment, as if tasting the name. "Leora," he repeated. "It does not sound like the thunder of your people." He then touched his own chest. "I am Thashunke Luta." He paused, then gave her the English translation. Red Horse. The name suited him. It spoke of strength of spirit of the untamed plains. "Why did you help me?" she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Red Horse looked into the fire, his profile stoic and thoughtful. "I saw you in the town. You looked at the flower by the water trough. The other whites, they see only dirt. You saw the life that pushes through." He turned his gaze back to her, and it was as intense as it had been that first day. "And I saw the man Thorn put his hand on you. He looks at you like he looks at the land. Something to be broken, fenced, owned." A shiver ran down Leora's spine. He had seen it all, understood it all in a single glance. "He is a dangerous man," Red Horse continued. "He drives his cattle across our hunting grounds. He breaks the treaties written on the white man's paper. He will not stop until he has everything." They sat in silence for a time, a fragile peace between two worlds. He showed her how to find north using the stars. She in turn took out a pencil and a dry page from her sketchbook and drew the constellation for him, writing the English name, the Big Dipper, beneath it. It was a small, simple exchange, but it felt momentous, a bridge built of starlight and graphite. He brought her back to the edge of town before the sun rose, leaving her at a spot where she could walk back without being seen. Before he left, he pressed a small, intricately beaded pouch into her hand. "For the pain," he said, gesturing to her ankle. "Crush the leaves inside with water. Do not let them see this." Then he was gone, melting back into the prairie as silently as he had appeared. Leora hobbled back to the boarding house, her mind reeling. The encounter had changed something fundamental within her. The world felt larger, more complex, filled with a silent magic she was only just beginning to perceive. Her return, however, didn't go unnoticed. A stable boy had seen the silhouette of an Indian pony on the ridge at dawn. By midday, whispers had slithered through Redemption Gulch like grass snakes. The outsider Thorn's woman had spent the night on the prairie. Silas Thorn confronted her outside the general store, his face a mask of cold fury. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "I was lost." "A storm came up," she replied, her chin held high. "Lost," he sneered. "Or were you keeping an appointment with one of those filthy heathens? I saw the way that Buck looked at you." "Did you go running to him?" The accusation was so vile, so far from the quiet respect Red Horse had shown her, that Leora could only stare at him in stunned silence. Her silence was all the confirmation the watching townspeople needed. Their suspicion curdled into outright hostility. She was a traitor to her own kind. "You are a fool, little girl," Thorn hissed, grabbing her arm, his grip bruising. "You think you can play games with me? This is my town. You belong to me. And if I can't have you, I'll make sure no one can, especially not some savage." He shoved her away from him, and she stumbled, her injured ankle giving way. She fell to the dusty ground, the humiliation a burning brand on her cheeks. The people of Redemption Gulch just watched. No one moved to help her. In their eyes, she had been judged and found wanting. She was less than a stranger now. She was an outcast, tainted by her association, real or imagined, with the world beyond their small, hateful borders. Lying in the dirt, looking up at their cold, condemning faces, Leora realized the truth of Red Horse's words. This town, this civilization, was a prison. Her freedom, she understood with a chilling certainty, lay out there on the vast, dangerous plains she had just left. The days that followed were a quiet form of torture. Leora was utterly ostracized. Shopkeepers served her with grim silence, their hands snatching her coins as if they were contaminated. Martha, the boarding house owner, began leaving her meals outside her door, on a tray, no longer willing to have her at the communal table. Children who had once watched her with shy curiosity now ran away when she approached. The whispers followed her everywhere, branding her with words like Indian lover and traitor. Silas Thorne was the architect of her isolation, and he reveled in it. He no longer approached her with false charm. Instead, he watched her from a distance, his pale eyes filled with a triumphant malice. He was breaking her just as Red Horse had predicted, and he was enjoying the process. Her sanctuary on the plains was gone, too. Thorne had posted men on the ridges surrounding the town. They were hunting parties, he claimed, but Leora knew they were there to watch her, to keep her penned in. She was a prisoner in a town that despised her. Despair began to settle over her like a shroud. Her sketches lay untouched, the vibrant life of the prairie, a painful memory. She was wilting, cut off from the sun. One night, unable to bear the suffocating confines of her room, she slipped out into the alley behind the boarding house. The moon was a silver sliver in a black sky. She just needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with hatred. A soft sound, like the call of a night bird, came from the darkness at the end of the alley. Her heart leapt into her throat. She froze, every muscle tensed. The call came again, low and insistent. It was a sound she recognized from her night on the prairie with Red Horse. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she moved toward the sound, staying in the deepest shadows. At the edge of town, where the last shack gave way to the open plains, he was waiting. Red Horse stood beside his pony, a silhouette against the starlit horizon. "They are closing the world around you," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the still night air. Tears pricked her eyes, tears of frustration and a profound aching loneliness. "I have nowhere to go." "That is not true," he said simply. He took a step closer, his presence radiating a calm strength that was the very antithesis of Thorne's oppressive power. "My people, they are not like yours. A person is judged by the strength of their heart, not the color of their skin. There is a place for you with us, if you choose it." The offer hung in the air between them, staggering in its implications. He was offering her a new life, a new world. To accept meant leaving behind everything she had ever known, her language, her culture, her past. It was a leap into an unknown abyss. But to stay, was to slowly suffocate, to be ground down to nothing under Silas Thorne's heel. She looked from his earnest, steady face back toward the dark, silent town that had become her cage. There was no choice at all, not really. Yes, she whispered the word, a puff of white in the cold air. I'll come. A flicker of relief, deep and profound, crossed his features. He helped her onto his pony, and this time, as she settled in front of him, it was not as a rescued victim, but as a willing partner in a desperate escape. They moved like ghosts skirting the ridges where Thorn's men were posted, Red Horse navigating the darkness with an instinct that was as natural as breathing. The journey to the Lakota camp took the rest of the night. As the first pale light of dawn painted the eastern sky, she saw it. Tucked into a hidden valley sheltered by cottonwood trees and a meandering creek was a village of teepees. Smoke curled lazily from their peaks, and the air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, the sound of dogs barking, and the soft murmur of a language she didn't understand. Fear, sharp and real, seized her. What had she done? These were the people she had been taught to fear her whole life. As they rode into the camp, faces turned toward them. The murmuring stopped. 100 pairs of dark, inquisitive eyes fixed on her, the strange white woman seated on Red Horse's pony. An old woman with a face like a beautiful weathered map emerged from the largest teepee. Her long hair was grey, and her eyes held the wisdom of 1,000 seasons. She looked at Red Horse, then at Leora, her gaze sharp and penetrating. Red Horse dismounted and spoke to her in Lakota, his tone respectful. After he finished, the old woman approached Leora. She reached out a wrinkled hand and gently touched Leora's cheek, then her hair. She said something in a soft, musical tone. Red Horse translated. She is my grandmother, Wanacha. She says you have the eyes of a trapped hawk who has finally found the sky. She says you are welcome in our home. Tears streamed down Leora's face, hot and cleansing. They were not tears of fear or sadness, but of an overwhelming, bone-deep relief. She had been called a stranger, an outcast, a traitor. But here in a world she had never known, among a people she had been raised to fear, she had just been offered a home. Life in the Lakota camp was a complete unraveling and reweaving of Leora's existence. Every rhythm, every belief was different. The clock was the sun, and the stars not the harsh clang of a town bell. Wealth was measured not in gold or land deeds, but in generosity, courage, and the health of one's family. Wanacha Red Horse's grandmother took Leora under her wing. She was the tribe's healer, a keeper of ancient knowledge. She saw the botanist's soul within Leora and began to teach her. Leora's academic knowledge of plants was transformed. She learned that yarrow was not just Achelea millefolium, but a powerful healer of wounds, a gift from the Creator. She learned that the sagebrush she had once sketched for its beauty was used in ceremonies to cleanse the spirit. The land was not a subject to be studied, but a living pharmacy, a library of sacred stories. The language was the highest barrier, but Leora was a determined student. She learned words from the children who were endlessly fascinated by her pale skin and reddish-brown hair. She learned phrases from Wanacha as they gathered herbs by the creek, and she learned the language of the heart from Red Horse. Their bond deepened in the quiet spaces between words. He took her riding across the vast plains, showing her the secret places the land held a hidden waterfall, a cliff face covered in ancient paintings, the spot where the buffalo herds still grazed in breathtaking numbers. He taught her to be silent, to watch, to listen to the world around her. She, in turn, shared stories of her home across the ocean of the father, who had taught her to love the green, growing things of the earth. She discovered that their souls, born worlds apart, spoke the same language of reverence for the natural world. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, he turned to her. "The name the whites gave you, Leora, it is beautiful," he said. "But it is the name of the woman who was lost. That is not who you are now." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "My grandmother has given you a new name. She calls you Wingyan-Naha," he said softly. "Hidden woman. Because you came to us from the shadows, and because your spirit, like the most powerful medicine, was hidden from the eyes of those who would destroy it." The name settled over her, a warm and fitting cloak. She was no longer Leora Byrne, the outcast of Redemption Gulch. She was Wingyan-Naha, a woman of the Lakota people. Her love for Red Horse grew with a quiet, powerful certainty, like a deep-rooted tree. It was a love built on shared silence, mutual respect, and a profound understanding that transcended culture. He was not just her protector, he was her partner. He saw her strength, her intelligence, and he valued it. But the world of Redemption Gulch had not forgotten her. Scouts would occasionally return to the camp with grim news. Silas Thorne was furious. Her disappearance was a public humiliation he could not abide. He had offered a bounty for the return of the white woman captured by savages. More than that, his cattle were now encroaching further and further onto sacred Lakota hunting grounds, a deliberate and aggressive provocation. Thorne was not just looking for her. He was looking for an excuse for war. The idyllic peace of Leora's new life was a fragile bubble, and she knew, with a growing sense of dread, that the man she had fled was marshalling his forces to burst it, ready to drown her new world in blood and fire. The love she had found, she realized, would have to be fought for. The first omen was not a vision or a whispered prophecy, but a smear of ugly black smoke against the pristine blue canvas of the afternoon sky. It rose from the south, a defiant pillar of violation from the direction of a small, sacred grove of ancient cottonwoods, a place where generations of Lakota had sought solace and spoken to the spirits. A lone hunter, returning to the village with a deer slung over his pony, had seen the flames. He rode into the camp not with the pride of a provider, but with the grim urgency of a messenger bearing news of sacrilege. A cold silence fell over the bustling village. This was not a wildfire born of lightning or careless accident. This was a message written in ash and smoke by Silas Thorne. It was a calculated act of desecration, a sneering declaration that nothing they held sacred was beyond his reach. Nothing was safe from his consuming fire. That evening, the elders and war leaders gathered in the central council tipi. The air inside was thick with the scent of sage and palpable tension. Leora now, Wingyan-Naha, was permitted to sit with the women at the edge of the circle, a testament to the place she had earned among them. She watched Red Horse as he stood to speak his face, a mask of controlled fury, the flickering firelight casting his features in sharp, unforgiving relief. "We have tried to honor the treaties." He began his voice, a low rumble that commanded the attention of every soul present. "We have moved when they told us to move. We have watched their iron horse carve up the prairie. We have watched them slaughter the buffalo for their hides, leaving the meat to rot under the sun. Now this man Thorne uses our hospitality to a lost woman as his excuse for war." His gaze swept across the faces in the tipi. "But do not be deceived. This is not about Wingyan-Naha. He wants this valley. He wants the water from our creek for his ever-growing herds. He wants the grass our ponies eat. He wants us erased from the land, a forgotten whisper in the wind." An old, respected warrior named Four Horns, His face, a web of deep lines, rose slowly. Your heart is brave. Red horse, but it is the heart of a young man. We cannot fight the whites. They are endless. Their repeating rifles spit death faster than a man can draw breath. They are like a plague of locusts. For every one we strike down, 10 more will swarm to take its place. To fight is to invite our own annihilation. And so we should run. Red horse challenged his voice, rising with passion, the cords in his neck standing out. We should surrender the land where the bones of our grandfathers are buried. We have run from the east and the south. There is little land left to run to. I say we make our stand here. I say we show them that the Lakota are not so easily swept aside. It is better to die on our feet, as men defending our home, than to live on our knees in a barren land not of our choosing. His words ignited the spirits of the younger warriors, who murmured their assent, their hands tightening on the weapons resting across their laps. Leora felt a surge of pride and terror course through her. She looked at Red Horse not as an outsider, but as his wife, her heart echoing his fierce determination. She knew then that she could not sit by while the men prepared for a battle that was in part her fault. She was the spark Thorn was using to light this fire. That night she sought out Wanacha in her tipi, the air rich with the smell of drying herbs. I cannot fight with a bow or a rifle, Leora said, her voice trembling but firm. But I cannot sit and weave while others die for me. I know this man, Silas Thorn. I know his arrogance, his greed. He will underestimate you. And I know the land, not as a warrior does, but as a healer does. There must be something I can do. Wanacha's dark, knowing eyes studied her for a long moment. A warrior's heart is not only in the hand that holds the spear, the old woman said softly, taking Leora's hands in her own weathered ones. It is in the mind that sees the hidden path and the spirit that refuses to break. Your knowledge is your strength, child. Your path will be your own. The spirits will show you the way. Inspired, Leora's mind raced back to her father's books, to passages describing ancient European tactics of how people used the land itself as a weapon. An idea wild and dangerous began to form. For the next day, she did not sketch or study. She harvested, with a group of older women who trusted Wanacha's wisdom and had come to respect her. Leora moved across the valley with a desperate purpose. They gathered enormous bundles of milkweed, stripping the pods of their fine, silvery floss. It was highly flammable and would create a dense, choking smoke. Then they moved to the rocky crags, carefully collecting the leaves of a plant the Lakota called Iyuksha, or poison ivy, which she knew would release a terribly irritating oil when crushed. The attack came 2 days later, just as the dawn was bleeding grey light into the eastern sky. A lookout's sharp cry alerted the camp. Thorn and a posse of nearly 30 men thundered towards the valley, their forms dark against the rising sun. They were a disorganized mob, fueled by whiskey and the righteous certainty of their own superiority. Red Horse was ready. He had already led his warriors into the high ground, hidden amongst the rocks on either side of the narrow pass that served as the valley's only entrance. As Thorn's men rode into the trap, their loud boasts echoing off the canyon walls, Red Horse gave a signal. The air was suddenly filled with the deadly whisper of arrows. They rained down from the ridges, finding their marks in men and horses. The posse, caught completely by surprise, broke into chaos. They fired their powerful Winchester rifles wildly, their bullets chewing uselessly at the rocks that sheltered the warriors. This was Leora's cue. On the ridge opposite Red Horse, she and the women lit the bundles of milkweed floss they had wrapped around arrows. They fired them not at the men, but at the dry brush at the mouth of the pass. The floss ignited instantly, and a thick, billowing wall of white smoke surged into the canyon carried by the morning breeze. It blinded Thorne's men, turning their already chaotic situation into a pandemonium of panicked, coughing confusion. Next, they hurled clay pots, filled with the crushed poison ivy leaves and oil down onto the rocks below. The pots shattered, and Red Horse's warriors on cue fired flaming arrows into the oily residue. A second wall, this one, of acrid, stinging fire erupted below, boxing the posse in. Horses screamed and reared, throwing their riders. Men blinded by the white smoke and choked by the black were thrown into utter disarray. Now Red Horse roared his voice a clarion call of fury. With a piercing war cry that was echoed by 50 others, he led his warriors down from the ridges, falling upon the terrified and disorganized mob like a force of nature. The Lakota, fighting to defend their families on the land of their ancestors, were devastating. Leora watched from her perch, her knuckles white as she gripped the rock before her, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Red Horse, a whirlwind of deadly grace, fighting with a ferocity that was both terrifying and beautiful. And then, through a momentary gap in the swirling smoke, she saw Silas Thorne. He had managed to control his panicked horse, his face a mask of incandescent rage. His plan was in ruins, his men being cut down around him. His furious eyes scanned the chaos and then swept up the ridge. For a heart-stopping second, his gaze locked with hers. In his eyes, she saw no desire, no possessiveness, only a bottomless well of pure, unadulterated hatred. This was all her fault. He raised his Winchester rifle, the barrel glinting in the morning light, and aimed it not at the warriors swarming his men, but directly at her. A silent scream caught in her throat. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing eternity. She saw the flash from the rifle's muzzle. In the very same instant, a blur of motion exploded from the heart of the battle below. Red Horse, seeing Thorne's intent, had launched himself from his own pony in a desperate, impossible leap, tackling Thorne from his saddle. The two men crashed to the ground, the rifle shot going wide and harmlessly over Leora's head. They rolled in the dust, a brutal thrashing tangle of muscle and hate. Thorne was bigger, heavier, but Red Horse was faster, fueled by a primal fury to protect his home and his wife. He drove his knife home, and the battle for the valley was over. The remaining posse members, seeing their leader fall, broke and fled in a desperate, cowardly rout. As silence descended upon the pass, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of the dying fires, Leora scrambled down the ridge. She ran to where Red Horse stood over Thorne's body, his chest heaving, his body bruised and bleeding, but his eyes alive with a fierce, protective love as they met hers. They had won. They had saved their home. But as she looked at the body of the powerful white man lying in the dirt, a cold wave of certainty washed over her. This victory was not an end. It was only the beginning of a much larger, more terrible war. The victory was not a trumpet blast of triumph, but a somber, echoing silence. The immediate savage fury of the battle gave way to a profound and heavy quiet, punctuated only by the mournful keening of the women who had lost a husband, a son. The air in the valley, usually so clean and scented with sage, was now thick with the metallic tang of blood and the lingering, acrid stench of smoke. The cost of defending their home had been etched into the heart of the community. Two of their finest young warriors would not see another sunrise. Leora, now fully Wingyan-Naha, moved through the somber camp as if in a trance, yet her hands were steady. She worked tirelessly alongside Wanacha, her fine Boston sensibilities, a distant memory, a shed skin from another life. She knelt in the dirt of a tipi, packing a deep gash on a warrior's shoulder, with a poultice of yarrow, her voice, a low, soothing murmur, as she spoke the few Lakota words of comfort she knew. His wife watched with grateful, tear-filled eyes. In that moment, Leora felt an overwhelming sense of belonging that Redemption Gulch, with its shared language and culture, had never come close to offering. Her hands, stained with herbal remedies, and the grime of honest work, felt more truly her own than they ever had, holding a delicate sketching pencil. That evening, the bodies of the fallen were prepared for their journey to the spirit world with solemn reverence. Their families wailed a raw and cathartic expression of grief that tore at Leora's soul. She saw Red Horse standing apart, watching the ceremony, his shoulders slumped with the weight of command. The victory was his, but so were the losses. He had saved his people today, only to place them in the path of a much larger, more implacable foe. Later, the Council of Elders convened once more. There was no debate this time, only the grim acceptance of a bitter truth. The chief, a wise and weary man named Sitting Bear, rose to address his people, his voice heavy with the sorrow of a leader, forced to choose the path of exile. "We have spilled the blood of the Wasichu on this ground," he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his tribe. "And the Wasichu are like a river in a flood. Their memory is long, and their vengeance is relentless. The ghost of this man Thorn will guide the blue-coated soldiers to our door. They will come not for justice, but for extermination. This valley which has sheltered our people for generations has become a trap." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We must leave. We must travel the long path north to the lands of our cousins, the Hunkpapa, near the sacred Pahasapa. The Black Hills, a sanctuary but a distant one." A wave of palpable sorrow moved through the assembled people. To leave was to survive, but it was also a kind of death, the death of a home, of a connection to the land that held the very bones of their ancestors. Women began to quietly pack their belongings, their movements efficient but laden with grief, wrapping precious family heirlooms and dismantling the tipis that had been the only homes their children had ever known. As the last light of their final day in the valley faded, Red Horse found Leora by the creek. She was staring into the water, watching it flow ceaselessly over the smooth stones, a symbol of the life that would continue here long after they were gone. "Wingyan Naha," he said, his voice soft behind her. He came to stand beside her, his presence a solid comfort in the twilight. "The path ahead will be harder than any you have yet walked. We will be hunted. The winter will be cold, the food scarce. The soldiers will not be a mob of fools like Thorn's men." He turned to her, his dark eyes filled with a love so deep it was painful. "You do not have to come with us," he said, the words costing him dearly. "It is not your fight. You could go east. I could take you, bring you close enough to another town. You could find your own people, live a life of peace, away from all this." It was the greatest gift he could offer her, her freedom, even though the thought of it was a knife in his own heart. Leora looked up at him, at his strong, earnest face, and a slow, sad smile touched her lips. "My own people, Red Horse," she asked, her voice quiet, but ringing with absolute certainty. "Do you mean the people who called me a stranger before I spoke my name? The ones who looked upon me with contempt and suspicion, the women who whispered behind their hands, and the men who saw me as property to be claimed, the people who stood by and watched as their leader threw me to the ground in the street?" She stepped closer, reaching up to lay her palm against his cheek, her touch gentle and grounding. "Those are not my people. My people are the ones who saw a hawk in a cage and offered it the sky. My people are the ones who gave me a name that fit my spirit. My grandmother, Wanacha, who taught me the true language of the earth, is my people. The children who taught me to laugh again are my people. Her eyes, the color of the Irish Sea, held his captive. Yuthashunkeluta are my people. Your heart is my home. Wherever you go, I will go. There is no other path for me. The conflict in his eyes melted away, replaced by a wave of profound relief and adoration. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the anchor of his entire world. Then my spirit will never be lost, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. For you, hold it in your hands. Before they departed, under a canopy of brilliant, indifferent stars, they were bound together. It was not a ceremony of pomp or legal contracts, but of something far older and more sacred. They stood before Sitting Bear and Wanacha, the entire village their witness. Wanacha brought forth a magnificent buffalo robe, painted with symbols of their family histories and the sacred geometry of the world. She draped it over both of their shoulders, a single shelter to house 2 souls. Sitting Bear spoke of the buffalo, how it gave everything of itself to sustain the people, and how a husband and wife must do the same for each other. Red Horse spoke his Lakota words, a solemn vow, declaring that her heart was his heart, her breath was his breath, and her path was now his path, until the day the spirits called him home. Leora, in halting but heartfelt Lakota, pledged to stand by his side, to honor his people, and to be a true wife to him for all her days to come. At the first hint of dawn, the village began its long, silent exodus. A procession of people and ponies moved out of the valley, a river of life flowing towards the unknown. Leora Wingyan rode proudly beside her husband, Red Horse. She was no longer a botanist from Boston, a stranger in the West. She was a Lakota woman, her destiny irrevocably woven into the vibrant, resilient tapestry of her chosen people. The future stretched before them, a vast and uncertain wilderness. The shadow of the U.S. cavalry was a promise of conflict on the horizon, and the way of life she had come to love was threatened with extinction. But as she looked at the man beside her, his profile resolute against the rising sun, and at the endless plains stretching out to meet a sky they would now share, she felt not a trace of fear. They had called her a stranger, an outcast, unfit for their world, but in the heart of a Lakota warrior, before she had ever spoken a word, she had been called his. And in that silent, powerful claim, she had finally, truly come home. In the end, Leora's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes we must travel to the most unfamiliar places to find out who we truly are. Her journey from being an outcast, a stranger, to becoming Wingyan, a cherished member of a new family, shows us that home is not always the place we are born, but the place where we are seen, accepted, and loved for our true spirit. It's a testament to a love that was strong enough to cross any border and brave enough to face any storm. The wild heart of the West was not just a place of conflict and hardship, but also one of profound connection and rebirth. If this story of courage, identity, and unbreakable love resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates epic tales, and subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of the human heart. Thank you for listening.